All right, guys, I have the pleasure to announce that we are shifting now to our keynote speaker, Derek Khanna, who is the Director of Policy for the Blockchain Research Institute. Is that correct? Blockchain.
Bitcoin policy.
Bitcoin. I told you I'd mess it up. All right, come on up here. Correct me.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking around till 5 p.m. I've been to many conferences, and I remember the 5 p.m. club, the few, the proud, the ones who stick around. Hope you guys weren't here since 9 a.m. Hope you're entertained enough to stay to the end. We don't have a clicker, so my colleague Grant over there is going to be on clicker duty. And away we go. I just wanted to start off by thanking the organization here for that gracious introduction, and to thank the Blockchain Association for hosting this conference. As we all know, in the past year, issues related to blockchain, crypto, and mining have become topical and under increased scrutiny. That makes a conference like this here today even more important. My name is Derek Khanna. I've been interested in Bitcoin and crypto for quite a while. About 10 years ago, I first encountered Bitcoin, and I've been initially engaged in some of the initial conversations in Congress on Bitcoin and other policy discussions in other places. I've been particularly excited with how crypto allows average people to come together and operate collectively. I think we're on the next slide, Grant. Next one. This is a company that I had before, which was Draftly, to just highlight what it was like to operate collectively as a whole without crypto. And that's why I've been so interested in this crypto world. But in the past few years, the conversation on crypto has shifted increasingly negative, focusing on the environmental costs of Bitcoin. I was particularly concerned by the environmental harm, and I've tried to evaluate these questions to help more concretely separate the fact from the fiction, wherever the facts led us. We are here today to talk about Bitcoin and the environment. Bitcoin, as many of you know, makes up about 60% of market cap of cryptocurrency. It also makes up the vast majority of transactions and essentially any other indicator that you may use. For years, criticisms of Bitcoin's energy use have made the headlines. It's become a common trope in the media, something cited but rarely understood or investigated. They say Bitcoin uses as much energy as Argentina. Statements like this intend to shed a light on these questions, and they are a legitimate concern, but they do so without offering a fair comparison, and when taken out of context, they are misleading. For many of you, the environmental impact may be the main issue that you have with Bitcoin today. You may see the benefit of a decentralized currency as offering an alternative to the fiat money system, but you may ask, how can I reconcile that with its environmental costs? Well, I'm here to address your concerns, because it's likely true that much of what you have heard about Bitcoin and the environment is wrong. Now, originally the Bitcoin community, as many of you know, was commonly defined by its libertarian ethos. But today, to the extent that was ever true, it is now superseded by events. Bitcoin is not that stereotype anymore, if it ever was. Bitcoin is commonly held by Hispanics, African Americans, and other minority groups. It includes many people of different diverse political perspectives, including those who take the environment seriously. And that's where I come in. And I'm here to have a more nuanced conversation on Bitcoin and the environment, to separate the facts from the fiction. So today, this evening, for those who stuck around till the 5 p.m. hour, we will be discussing proof of work and how it is a central innovation. We will be rebutting misleading media information on Bitcoin. We will be explaining how Bitcoin can redefine and vitalize our green energy system. We will be sharing real-world examples of how crypto mining is already a pro-green technology. And we will be discussing how banning Bitcoin technology isn't really possible anyways. Then we will be examining the energy impact of Bitcoin in the context of the value that it expends. All right, starting at the very beginning, first principles. Well, I think this is particularly important to do because everyone talks about Bitcoin. They use phrases like proof of work, They use phrases like proof of stake. Sometimes we have to go back to first principles. Now, as many of you know, Bitcoin is a decentralized currency without a central bank or central administrator that can be sent from user to user without an intermediary. Now, in developing such a system, Satoshi encountered two central problems. How do you issue money fairly on this network? How do you trust people to not manipulate the network to their advantage? And Satoshi's innovation was proof of work. I mention this because increasingly on energy conversations, people will say, why do we even need proof of work? We need to go back to the context of proof of work as a central innovation. Proof of work is a consensus mechanism that requires network members, miners, to expend energy to propose and order transactions on the network, and then for nodes to validate those transactions once they are so ordered. Then, to do so, the computer solves a randomly generated puzzle and is rewarded with a set amount of Bitcoin, which is how new money is issued into the network. Now, why does Bitcoin run on this proof of work system? Well, the energy expenditure to propose and order transactions and the fact that thousands of nodes run on the network to validate those transactions is the innovation that makes it very hard to manipulate or attack it. This allows people to trust the network without a central party to manage it, which is, in most ways, fundamentally different from every other prior financial system. Bitcoin is the first global monetary system where this new money issuance is distributed based upon a fair, open market competition. This is truly revolutionary, and it's a key reason why Bitcoin uses the energy-intensive model of proof of work. Now let's examine the alternatives briefly. Well, an alternative is appointing a single authority. This is what happens with the Federal Reserve. Or granting certain users special access to money issuance. This is what commonly happens in proof of stake. Proof of work has created a novel system that allows for anyone, anywhere in the world to compete for Bitcoin's issuance. This decentralized system ensures that no individual person has special privilege. This is very unlike our current financial system, with its distinctive advantages for gatekeepers and the wealthy. It's also unlike proof-of-stake blockchains, which typically require users to hold a certain amount of money or dedicate specific computing resources to compete for new issuance, which tends to, again, advantage wealthy participants. These users are often essentially privileged within the network. In short, proof of work democratizes a global financial network. It allows from anyone, anywhere in the world to mine Bitcoin. Miners just have to follow the rules and provide computation. As such, energy usage is inherent to the value of Bitcoin. Thus, Bitcoin does not waste energy. Rather, this energy is used for computational work, which is how the network itself functions. All right, we talked about basics. Now let's examine how the media evaluates Bitcoin today. While the system inherently requires energy usage for the reasons I already stated, media predictions have been pretty erratic on Bitcoin's future and continued energy usage. For example, Newsweek predicted that by 2020, Bitcoin mining would consume all the world's energy. If we could flip to the slide with the Newsweek one. The interesting thing about the Newsweek prediction is that the Newsweek prediction was made in 2017, 3 years before 2020. Anyone know what the actual percentage is today?
1%.
Any other guesses?
1/10 of 1%.
0.1. All right, pretty good guesses. Best estimate seems to be about 0.27%, at least in 2021. Less than 1%. The World Economic Forum claimed in 2017 that by 2020, Bitcoin would consume more power than the entire rest of the world. Again, off by an order of magnitude of 200. Now, how does the media keep messing this up? Well, in part, I sympathize with them. It's actually a difficult question to answer, which I've encountered in the past year working on this problem. And the problem is made more difficult with shoddy academic research. Some of the most widely cited and foundational academic research on the topic, specifically on mining and Bitcoin, is from this paper by Mora et al., and is the one cited by Newsweek and the World Economic Forum. We flip to, you've seen a lot of these news articles, I'm sure. There we go, the Moore article. So this Moore article is widely cited. It's the basis of almost all of these other articles, except it's been widely disproven. And it was published in Nature Climate Change, one of the highest rated climate journals. Except when it was debunked, it was actually debunked within climate change and other outlets, including by experts saying that it should not be, it's fundamentally flawed, so sufficiently flawed, and it should not be taken seriously by researchers, policymakers, or the general public. Yet this study continues to be cited even today. Now, again, I'm not saying this is a simple question, but we can't rely upon faulty research to get to the answers that we're seeking. This study in particular has a series of misunderstandings. It uses a per transaction energy cost, which we'll talk about more, as typically being fundamentally flawed. Now that phrase of a per transaction energy cost is often repeated not just by the media, but even the US Congress. 2 weeks ago at the January 20th Energy Committee hearing, the hearing memo said, quote, "The energy required for a Bitcoin transaction could power a home for more than 70 days." Again, using this concept of a per transaction energy cost. We will talk about that because Bitcoin's energy use is not primarily related to the number of transactions. Instead, its energy usage comes from mining, at least almost entirely, which is energy spent to keep the network secure and running. Again, we will delve into that more substantively because it's actually a very critical and complicated question that we need to address. All right, so I mentioned the stat on how Bitcoin uses as much energy as the entire country of Argentina. You may have heard other stats. Basically, any Nordic country will do. It uses a lot of energy, you hear. But so do domestic use of dryer tumblers or residential air conditioners. Almost any device used at scale uses a tremendous amount of energy and often more than relatively smaller countries. Saying that something uses as much energy as a random country sounds scary, but it actually doesn't tell you very much about how much energy that thing is using. For example, Bitcoin mining accounts for, as we said, roughly 0.27% of global energy production. But the gold industry uses more, albeit with a higher volume, and has other economic implications. But yet people typically don't say gold mining uses as much energy as Argentina. So let's evaluate some of these misconceptions that we're seeing on the environmental question. First misconception, if you are assuming that Bitcoin is having a massive economic implication, you probably aren't aware that renewables account for the largest share of Bitcoin's energy use around the world. And this matters a lot because when evaluating the environmental impact, it's a very relevant question, and it's an oversimplification just to focus on the amount of energy. 100 megawatts of energy from coal is much worse than 100 megawatts of energy from solar, and it's arguably worse than 1,000 megawatts of energy from solar. So the question is, where does the energy come from that goes into Bitcoin mining? And you can see from this chart, it's about 56% renewable. Now, it's difficult to get this stat. There are a few stats that are slightly deviating from it, but in general, it's significantly more sustainable meaning including nuclear power, than the broader energy mix in most places of the world, including the United States. So why? Why is this? Is this because Bitcoin miners are members of the Sierra Club? I mean, that may be the case, but that's not really what's going on here. It's economics. As most things, economics is what's going to drive actual structural changes in the economy. Miners are seeking out the cheapest energy available. Renewable energy operations often generate more power than they could possibly use. They generate more power than they can store or sell to the grid. And this drives prices low or even negative during these periods of mismatch. Now, following China's ban on Bitcoin mining, miners flock to places like West Texas, where renewables generate roughly 3 times as much energy as can be stored or transmitted in an average year. Today, according to some estimates, renewables account for approximately 56% of energy production, as seen here. More precisely, 56% is sustainable. For comparison, the US grid is approximately 21% sustainable for energy consumption. This fact has gone largely unnoticed. In fact, it's gone unnoticed even by crypto advocates. In July 2001, after initially accepting Bitcoin and having Bitcoin on the balance sheet for Tesla, Elon Musk suspended payment of Bitcoin, saying that he wanted to be sure that Bitcoin was over 50% renewable. Never mind the fact that Bitcoin has likely already reached this benchmark. Well, here's what's particularly interesting about this. Let's do an any energy comparison to the energy mix powering those Teslas. Well, 80% of Tesla charging is done at home, and for the average American, 21% of their energy is renewable. Thus meaning, Bitcoin has by far a greener energy mix than for those Teslas. Yet, Tesla is held as the standard bearer for greenification of the economy, and Bitcoin is often made out to be a villain. We should ask Mr. Musk, does that mean that Teslas must be put on hold until the energy used to charge them is more than 50% renewable? That's a great question. That's why I asked it. We tweeted at Elon Musk several weeks ago asking this very question. We got other people to retweet it. We haven't got an answer yet, but I think if the people in this audience would do me the favor of retweeting that or tweeting your own question or line to it, we may actually get an answer. Second point to make tonight. Bitcoin energy is not just more green than other users, it is increasingly so. That 56% renewable statistic is not static. The renewable portion is increasing rapidly. Bitcoin mining, and this is because Bitcoin mining, as already alluded to, is a unique consumer of technology. If you think about it, it's particularly strange. It can be done anywhere in the world with access to the internet, with electricity and some basic hardware. It can be done 24/7, or during certain hours, or even for a few seconds. This makes Bitcoin mining extremely unusual as an energy consumer. For example, data centers, potentially the closest analog, they have to be somewhat co-located with delivery of the data, whereas Bitcoin mining could happen on the space station. A main input for mining, as you all know, of course, is the cost of the energy. If the energy is too expensive, then mining will not be profitable. Again, for that day, for that week, for that minute. If it's cheap, or if the energy is free, or if the energy is negative, then it can become profitable. Increasingly, smart grids providing real-time pricing, we are seeing free and we are seeing negative pricing for energy. Why? Because if the grid has too much energy, they have to shut it off. They have to shut off access. They actually have to get rid of the excess energy. Now, given that mining is location agnostic, economic actors will favor the cheapest energy. And there is no cheaper energy than when the sun shines or the wind is blowing too strong. More precisely, when it is shining or blowing too strong for the energy demand at that precise moment. In fact, for safety, the grid needs to shed this excess energy. Considering that Bitcoin mining trends towards the most affordable energy anywhere in the world, and the cheapest energy is most often renewable energy, as can be seen here from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance article, logically, the energy mix will continue shifting towards renewables. All right, next point. This actually is my favorite. I'm not sure if this has been articulated anywhere else, so excited to present to this audiences today, which is, in all the rhetoric about Bitcoin mining, people talk about it like the energy is fundamentally lost. And that makes sense when we talk about energy for planes or for cars. Yeah, the energy is lost. But what you're going to find out today is that for Bitcoin mining, it's actually slightly different. And this is essentially an error when looking at the energy consumption, because energy used for mining is not the same as jet fuel for a plane. Why is this so? To mine Bitcoin, typically speaking, it involves powerful computers with ASIC chips to solve these cryptographic puzzles, which involve computational power. I'm sure you're all familiar. That requires electricity. But since electricity does not get converted to movement, and since under basic physics principles all energy must be conserved, that energy is converted to heat. As competition for Bitcoin mining has increased, today mining is typically done on an industrial scale. At this level, recapturing the heat is not only possible, it is increasingly necessary for the economics to work. And early on, Bitcoin's pseudonymous inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, realized this, predicted it. He realized that if Bitcoin mining were to, he predicted that Bitcoin mining could help replace existing sources of heat. And in so doing, it would require no additional power. This recapturing of heat energy is a huge deal because it means that the energy used in Bitcoin mining is not inherently wasted. Only the energy that cannot be recaptured is lost. And waste energy recovery can be around 50% efficient, significantly reducing the actual net energy used by Bitcoin. Now, what I'm talking about may seem theoretical. Maybe you've never heard of it before. Let's see it in the real world today. Because what I'm talking about is not theoretical. Let's go to North Vancouver. Has anyone been to North Vancouver? I'm a big skier. I want to go to North Vancouver. Maybe my team will fly me out to North Vancouver. Because in 2019, the city of North Vancouver passed a motion to increase its greenhouse gas reduction targets to achieve net zero by 2050. How to do it? Well, one of their solutions was Bitcoin mining. Part of the strategy involved a partnership with Mint Green to use excess heat from Bitcoin mining to heat city buildings or to use that heat for sea salt production. I think we have some slides on how this whole process works. We got the ASICs, we got the boilers. Next slide. Next slide. And that's not the only example. We have Bitcoin mining being used to warm greenhouses. We have Bitcoin mining being used to distill whiskey. We have the captured methane from pig waste being used to run miners' methane that would have already been flared. And another example of this in action that we can learn from within the economy is data centers. So again, data centers use a tremendous amount of energy. And similarly, data centers convert that energy to heat. Data centers, their energy impact is much larger than Bitcoin. So we can see what data centers are already doing as a precursor of what Bitcoin is going to do and is already doing. And within data centers, particularly we can study the Stockholm data park model in Sweden, where this heat is currently today being recaptured at scale. Now, why is this a big deal? What can we do with all that heating? Well, globally, heating accounts for 40% of energy-related carbon emissions. So significant that climate advocates have argued for only electronic heating systems, one of which is commonly known as a heat pump. The Sierra Club estimates that installing heat pumps will reduce heating emissions by more than 45% in the next 10 years. Again, which is of the 40% of energy-related carbon emissions. Now, what if those heat pumps included a Bitcoin mining device? Well, not only did Satoshi recommend something similar, but there's a company already doing that today. Let's flip back to the previous one, if you can flip back. I think it's interesting to actually recognize Satoshi in his own words talking about this. The heat from your computer is not wasted if you use it to heat your home. Sounds pretty fantastical. Who's going to do that? But this next one, maybe the consumer would buy a heating product that actually does that for them. You could flip to the next slide. You can go to this company right now, Wise Mining. They explain how it all works. It's pretty fascinating. Next slide. This is a good little infographic. Use the energy from hot water versus use the energy from Bitcoin mining. That's another product you can buy, if you go back to that one for a second. A water boiler, Sato. All right, next thing to examine. As I already alluded to, the concept of a per transaction cost for Bitcoin often fundamentally misunderstands how Bitcoin works. And that's because energy use does not scale linearly. I want to repeat that for a second. Bitcoin's energy usage does not scale linearly. That means that if you doubled the number of Bitcoin transactions today, energy usage would not go up by twice as much. It would not go up by 50% as much. It would not go up by 25% as much. Do you see what I'm saying here? It is important to understand this fact. We need to examine why this is the fact in order to understand the future of energy usage from Bitcoin. At the same time that I say that, however, I want to be careful in my language. More transactions over time and under various scenarios is likely to increase energy use. That part is true, but not linearly, and that part matters. So let's delve into that. I may even stop if you have questions on that, because it is important. And this is a common trope that we hear in the media. We have Eric Halthus saying, he's a top climate journalist, at current consumption rates, Bitcoin could never replace the global financial system. He claims that Bitcoin would need more energy than exists in the entire world just to power the network. Bill Gates, who I normally enjoy his comments, said something very similar. And he said it recently, last year. Bitcoin uses more energy per transaction than any other method known to man. Both of these statements and the Newsweek prediction are based upon taking the current energy usage of Bitcoin and then dividing by the number of transactions. And for Halthus, he takes the value and extrapolates it to account for all transactions globally into the future, multiplying out how many times Bitcoin would need to expand. Now, myself, coming from a consulting background, this is a common technique used in accounting or used in business strategy, except it's just wrong here. These lines of reasoning are fundamentally flawed because they assume that the amount of energy Bitcoin uses scales linearly with the adoption, as we already talked about. As an example of linearity, it uses a certain amount of energy for 100 transactions, 200 transactions would be double, but it's not that simple. And the reason is because the energy usage does not scale linearly, because the vast majority of energy, almost all energy in the network today, is used for mining. And mining is for the creation of new blocks, new currency to the Bitcoin network. And it uses slack capacity to handle the transactions. Thus, the main analysis of the future of increased transaction levels would be to forecast mining into the future under those scenarios. Now, there are, however, limiting factors through this increase. So Halthus is talking about if we had enough transactions for the entire global financial system. There are limiting factors within the Bitcoin network to get that large. There are limiting factors on the number of blocks. And these limiting factors somewhat limit the ability of Bitcoin to completely replace the global financial system. And that should be acknowledged, but it should be caveated, because that's not a sophisticated analysis of the situation at all. It is true that at the base layer of Bitcoin, there are not enough blocks for that level of volume. But if we think about that hypothetical for a second, if Bitcoin were to scale to the level of the entire global financial system, the Bitcoin community would have two options. One, a hard fork to increase the number of blocks to accommodate this scenario, which would increase computation amount, but not linearly. Or, much more likely, they would rely upon second layer applications, such as the Lightning Network, which is increasingly becoming the standard for Bitcoin transactions. And in practice, today Lightning is already widely and commonly, almost exclusively used for most Bitcoin transactions. Sorry, not almost exclusively, very commonly used. This concept of the second layer, for those who have been around for long enough may know, it's quite similar, at least in concept and terminology, in how the internet works with various layers. Now with Lightning, one transaction on the Bitcoin network can confirm up to 1 million payments at a time. This is able to scale, either in the current configuration of Lightning or in one in the future, to accommodate all global transactions. This increase in Lightning would have a cost. I want to realize that. I'm not saying this is a zero-cost proposition, but that cost has nothing to do with the current cost of the Bitcoin network, because the Bitcoin network is almost exclusively Bitcoin mining. Nonetheless, even if we disregard the layer 2 applications, those quotes are still misleading, because Bitcoin would not stay constant in that scenario. All right, another thing to share on Bitcoin being more pro-environment than you may suppose. Methane flares. In North Dakota, Equinor and Enerplus have used flared gas to mine Bitcoin. Crusade Energy contends that its mining system can avoid 2/3 of the methane emissions that would occur if, as is the alternative, the gas were vented or flared. North Dakota and Wyoming recently passed laws giving tax breaks to producers to provide gas to cryptocurrency and other data miners that would already otherwise be flared, again, cutting 2/3 of methane emissions. Next slide. You may have heard the analogy that Bitcoin is like a battery. Well, this isn't entirely true, but there are similarities, and those similarities and disparities are worth exploring. Disparities. While Bitcoin cannot store energy, you cannot recover it, it can monetize excess energy production, especially energy that would otherwise go unused if not for Bitcoin mining. When the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, as already said, wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy, but they often can't provide, or to some experts they can never provide, base load. And they can't easily time shift for demand curve spikes that don't exactly line up with wind and solar. This may require expensive batteries, reliance on dirty energy, overbuilding to handle the situations, or other cumbersome situations like pumping water up a mountain. But when firms are able to tap into either new battery alternatives or something like Bitcoin mining, it can change the economics. If a company can mine Bitcoin in times of low energy demand, but where they have abundant supply, then it allows for overbuilding or investing in other forms of batteries to supplement. That's a big deal. Next slide. Great. The last thing I want to talk about today, on a piece of misinformation, is almost all the analysis on Bitcoin's energy usage. We've already talked about how it's more green than most forms of energy already existing, and that the composition of the energy matters more than the amount of the energy. We've already talked about how it's not going to increase linearly in the future. But it's important to recognize that the equation is actually more complicated than that. Because if Bitcoin transactions are displacing some other transaction, then what you actually should be evaluating is the delta, the marginal increase in energy usage from the customer changing their activity to use Bitcoin as opposed to the alternative. And in fact, when this analysis has been done, it's actually been quite illustrative. So let's break down what's actually occurring within the Bitcoin network. As a general matter, Bitcoin transactions, Bitcoin investments, Bitcoin speculation, everything you've heard about with Bitcoin, I propose goes into roughly 4 categories of human behavior. Category 1, store of value, long-term holder of value or wealth creation protection, like a bank account. Some may argue, not the best bank account. I'm just saying it's a form of human behavior. Second section option, long-term speculation, long-term investment, or otherwise day trading investment. Some may call this speculation. My colleagues would call this investment. Everything in that category. Third category, day-to-day payments with Bitcoin, like you would use your credit card or you would use cash to buy a coffee. And fourth type of transaction is large transfers, more akin to a SWIFT, a wire transfer, or a check. That could be me paying my international employees on a monthly basis. That could be remittances back to my family in another country, or buying something substantial like a house or a car. Now, for these 4 categories of actions of human behavior, if there was no Bitcoin or cryptocurrency alternative, the counterfactual, what that customer would have already done, would still involve energy. So the relevant analysis is actually the delta between the analog behavior and the Bitcoin-enabled behavior. As a lawyer, we would call this the but-for analysis. What is the delta of those two? And the delta is what matters. It also matters if you have an induced demand curve, if more people would have speculated versus if there did not exist at all. Those are the 2 factors, the increase in behavior and the delta between the analog behavior. So let's examine these 4 factors of human behavior. Long-term, the first is the as a holder of value. Sorry, we don't have that many slides on it, so you're just going to have to look at me and follow along. Okay, so if people didn't buy Bitcoin to secure and hold as a store of value, maybe they would buy gold. Well, how green is gold trading? Well, more energy is used by the gold industry, approximately 60 to 70% more than for Bitcoin mining. And that energy isn't capturable. Further, As many of you know, gold is a dirty business in other ways to the environment. Why? Because gold has to be mined and removed from the ground. Now, where is it mined? The number one location for mining is China. The number two location is Russia, not countries known for their environmental protection. Gold, weighing a lot, is then transported from that mine to a vault or a secure location with special weighted vehicles. It is then transferred when they need to move for physical custody changes. It needs to be in special buildings with huge vaults made out of more metal. And then it's protected perhaps with cameras running on electricity, other protection systems, maybe electronic wires, armed guards, and heated facilities for those armed guards, with computers, networks, and digital systems to maintain those facilities. I'm not an expert on this. My knowledge mainly comes from Goldfinger, but you get the picture. This is not environmentally free. Second use case, as an investment or speculation. Okay, so not all people are investing in gold. Let me rain on the next scenario. You may say that instead of buying gold, they would speculate, invest, choose your language, in equities with stock. Great question. According to a recent analysis, regular equity investments have a carbon emission profile to consider. In fact, quote, there is lower carbon intensity for Bitcoin than the average asset in a typical equities portfolio. Let's consider that for a second. If somebody took the money that they had in Bitcoin and instead transferred it to an average equity, we would expect for their environmental impact to decline. So if it's one or the other, if you had to choose between buying a stock, there's evidence to suggest that Bitcoin is actually greener. Next scenario, let's talk about day-to-day payments, buying coffee. Well, when you swipe your Visa credit card, we all know how inefficient that is, how expensive it is for the merchant, but it only uses a tiny bit of energy for that swipe, right? Well, what happens before and after that transaction? Well, the money has to move from your bank account to another bank account. That involves authorization steps, clearing steps, and more until you get to a settlement. And throughout this complex process, there's an entire system that needs to be supported. Computers to run these transactions, computers to monitor the computers, servers to watch for intruders. These transactions are overseen by real people in offices. You have materials to create these massive bank buildings across the country, across the world. The heating and cooling of these buildings and gas used to transport physical goods across from one bank to another. Now you may say, well, these are marginal costs, but they are real costs. And again, if we're going to compare consumer behavior of their Visa credit card, they need to be taken into account. There aren't buildings that need to be heated and cooled the same way for the individuals for Bitcoin. It's the Bitcoin mining equation, which we're already taking into account. Bitcoin mining expert Nick Carter put it best. Bitcoin is a complete self-contained monetary settlement system. Visa transactions are non-final credit transactions that rely on external underlying settlement rails. This entire system, is my proposition, uses a massive amount of energy, and it requires more analysis to find out exactly how much. But suddenly, the environmental impact of Bitcoin starts to make a lot more sense in the context of how our global monetary network system actually works. Next scenario, large-scale checks, SWIFTs, bank transfers. Until recently, the Federal Reserve had to operate its own airplane fleet. This airplane fleet physically flew checks across the country. While today, due to changes in regulation and technology, checks do not typically have to be physically exchanged, more analysis needs to be done how bank checks in the SWIFT network also has energy implications. Because under the SWIFT network, according to the Financial Times, transfers pass through multiple banks before reaching their final destination, making them time-consuming, costly, and lacking transparency. These transactions in SWIFT happen through 10,000 financial institutions in 200 countries. Again, those 10,000 financial institutions have servers, they have to have duplicate ledgers, they have to have offices, personnel, and heating. That's part of the equation. All right, next section. How Bitcoin can actually help the environment. So now we have examined some ways that the narrative on Bitcoin is more complex than media or the politicians often discuss. Let's next understand the overall energy mix and how Bitcoin mining may incentivize renewables and promote the development of a stronger grid. Well, as mentioned, Bitcoin mining has a unique energy demand profile. Its miners are portable. They can operate in a wide range of geographies, climates, even without a typical grid connection. They are especially price sensitive as part of a global zero-sum market. They are deployable at scale, and they are interoperable and flexible. Now, interestingly, because older and newer machines have different profitability profiles, Bitcoin is especially well suited in filling key niches in the energy system and developing symbiotically with renewable producers. Mining, in very non-obvious ways, may be a powerful tool to shift the change from an energy system from a dirty one to one based on renewable sources. Additionally, as already implied, it creates a profit mechanism for waste methane cleanup. And as prices stabilize, at least some portion of energy miners may replace large heating elements. All right, next section. Bitcoin may be powerful in accelerating the shift to an energy system based upon renewables. Why? Because energy needs to be at or below a certain cost threshold in order for Bitcoin mining to be profitable. If it's above that threshold, mining doesn't make much financial sense. And miners simply shut down their systems. As such, miners will seek out the cheapest form of energy in order to maximize their profits. In the United States and increasingly around the world, renewables, as already said, are often the cheapest source of energy. Renewables have an issue, however, that limits utilization. It is very hard to create a base load to meet the demand curve only using renewables. So here's where we're at. Renewables today are vitally important, but they're somewhat underutilized because of unreliability, lack of profitability. Now, if renewables were more reliable, more profitable, then it's likely that more energy grids would utilize even more wind, solar, and other forms of renewable energy as their primary sources of usable energy. This is where Bitcoin comes in. Companies that produce excess energy can mine Bitcoin with that energy to make up for lost revenue. Firms can make a conscious choice to overbuild renewable facilities, knowing that they will likely produce significant amounts of excess energy, except that that excess energy will not be wasted. They can instead utilize the energy through Bitcoin mining. This can be the difference between a profitable and unprofitable energy production operation. And in theory, areas with an abundance of energy production will be incentivized to build even more renewable projects because they can subsidize them with Bitcoin mining. This is how Bitcoin can have a role in solving our energy crisis, our global warming crisis. Now, what I'm talking about sounds theoretical. Again, let's see it in the real world. I have a few projects here that you may not be familiar with. First project, Lancium in Texas. Lancium raised $150 million to build Bitcoin mining facilities in West Texas that run on renewable energy. It also helps them provide grid stability. Now, right now, Texas has some of the country's highest winds. Texas is known for their cheap solar electricity. Despite this, renewables only make up 26% of Texas electricity. Reliability and profit issues stop that number from budging much higher. Sustainable energy, aside from nuclear, struggle to provide that base load needed for the Texas grid. But with operations like Lancium, this calculus begins to change. When there is excess energy produced in Texas, Lancium will collect the energy and use it for Bitcoin mining, helping to avoid the wasted energy supply. Their mining sites currently have 2,000 megawatts of capacity, 10 times the amount of energy needed to power downtown Dallas. As the CEO of Lancium put it best, Bitcoin mining is a fundamentally decarbonizing technology. Next example, the Virunga National Park in the Congo. Give me a slide on that one. In 2014, the European Union helped finance a 15-megawatt hydroelectric plant in a small tributary in the Congo. This plant is owned and operated by the Virunga National Park. As the New York Times wrote in 2017, these plants, quote, may save a park and aid a country. This is because due to the difficulty of grid construction, the park's management has not been able to use the power that they've created right away. instead. In 2020, it started to mine Bitcoin with the surplus energy. Now, normally generating energy revenue right away from a remote power plant in the mountains or jungles or deserts is nearly impossible because the energy is not connected to the customer. But with Bitcoin, the facility can profit even without distribution lines or local demand. This time of when you generate revenues is critically important to any business. Now, as the local demand rises, the miners will eventually turn off. The Bitcoin miners need prices in the range of 2 to 5 cents per kilowatt to run profitably generally. But practically every other electricity user will pay more. So, when there is competition for the energy that Bitcoin miners are buying, the miners will turn off their machines. And this addresses something that people often misunderstand, that Bitcoin mining is competing for energy. It's generally using energy that is wasted or not used by others. And these are not the only examples of projects of this happening today. We have TeraWulf, which raised $200 million to build a zero carbon mining effort. We have the Grid Infrastructure Project, which is profitably and vertically integrated Bitcoin mining that owns both the energy infrastructure and the mining. And last year, Compass Mining announced that they were working with a nuclear fission company to divert excess energy produced from the microreactors towards Compass's Bitcoin mining rigs. Now, overall, today, Bitcoin miners and companies are increasingly helping create a greener future. And at least the Bitcoin system is rapidly shifting towards renewables. All right, so we've discussed this. The next thing to talk about, regardless of your thoughts on Bitcoin and its energy implications, it's here to stay. Now, as some members of the media, politicians, and activists have tried to make Bitcoin the boogeyman for its energy impact, they act particularly foolish when they call for banning or heavily regulating Bitcoin mining in the United States. And this is increasingly common to hear comments like that, or to have hearings on the topic of banning Bitcoin mining. Now, obviously, we've already examined how Bitcoin's environmental impact is more nuanced than most people give it credit for. But moreover, the call to ban Bitcoin mining belies people's lack of understanding of what Bitcoin is and how it operates. Bitcoin does not have an off button. While the internet was built to survive a nuclear apocalypse, Bitcoin will similarly survive as long as there are people in the world who want Bitcoin and there is a functioning network. Even if you ban its use or mining in the United States, the network will not go away. But here's what could happen. And this is a bit of speculation. But whereas today much of Bitcoin mining is done at an industrial or business level scale, those American companies could not operate here. But average people could still use their ASICs and mine Bitcoin with relative impunity. To the extent that governments could stop Bitcoin mining in the United States or in the EU, large-scale mining could go to almost any other entity in the internet with access to power. Now, this is funny, Dr. Strangelove, how he learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. I thought that was pretty appropriate. Now, my background originally was in intellectual property. There's something known as the Berne Convention that provides copyright protections all over the world. And it's part of the reason that when companies like the Pirate Bay were banned in most of the world, they had to shift to third world developing countries or even non-countries such as Sealand, which we have a slide on next. Now, the ban of Pirate Bay and other pirate websites demonstrates how difficult it is to truly shut these things off from the face of the earth. But what's interesting is a company like Pirate Bay has difficulty actually monetizing what they do. This is because they don't make that much money necessarily. It's difficult to get advertisements for what they're doing because no reputable company would get advertisements. I don't mean to say that they make no money. They certainly have some money, but it's difficult for them to monetize. This is not true with Bitcoin. So you could have a Berne Convention of Bitcoin, ban it all over the world, but there's still a profit incentive that is significantly higher. And even for piracy, with relatively minimal profit incentive for the underlying actors, that's impossible to ban. Similarly, it's impossible to ban Bitcoin mining. Now, we saw what happened when China banned cryptocurrency. Billions of dollars of banned mining cryptocurrency. Billions of dollars of mining operations simply moved to the United States instead. And in that case, It actually made Bitcoin mining greener because China primarily used coal for mining, whereas the US has a more focus on renewables. Now, if the United States were to ban Bitcoin mining, it would simply be denying the network some of the largest and cheapest sources of sustainable energy on the planet. Logically, miners would migrate elsewhere and simply continue mining while using much more carbon-intensive energy stacks. So long as Bitcoin has value, miners will be incentivized to create it. And if the US pushes mining to other countries, to countries with less rule of law and regulation, do we think that Bitcoin mining will become less dirtier when it's done in rogue countries? Banning Bitcoin mining in the United States is merely outsourcing Bitcoin mining to dirtier countries, and it would make the overall cost of Bitcoin worse, not cleaner. All right, we're almost done, guys. Thanks for sticking with me. We're on nearly our last section, which is the value of Bitcoin. Now, we've examined a lot today to understand Bitcoin and the environment. But what often gets lost in this conversation is that so much technology and industry has some environmental costs. Yet we choose to use it. And while we try to make it greener, we don't write off a technology simply because it's not net zero. Let's imagine that airplanes were invented today. We wouldn't say that airplanes are suspect because they aren't a net positive for the environment. They aren't. And we don't freeze in time all technology before we were more woke on environment from the previous times as grandfathered in and okay, and then condemn all technologies that come thereafter with any environmental impact. And even for airplanes, today we are on the cusp of a new age of supersonic travel, which is more likely to use even more energy. We are on the golden age of commercial space travel, yet few condemn the goal of weekly or daily space missions for its environmental costs. And the reason is because we recognize the value in each. There is a value in flying and connecting society. There is a value, at least to the consumer, in flying faster than the speed of sound. And there is a value in weekly or daily space missions, even though rocket engines are not particularly clean. So what is the value of Bitcoin? The value that justifies its energy impact? I would argue it's significant. Bitcoin has a value. The idea of adding a payment layer to the internet is one with a long history. And increasingly today, Americans are using less and less actual cash, instead using digital payments. Now, as many people in this room likely know, credit cards charge a 2% fee on all transactions. That is a huge tax on the economy. In some quarters, this interchange fee appears to be higher than Walmart's net profit margin. Think about that for a second. Those who are international in the audience may have to do some research on US interchange fees because they're actually quite different. At least in the United States, higher than Walmart's net profit margin for some quarters. The SWIFT network is roughly 50 years old. And while a substantial update has been made with the global payment innovation system, this does not appear to have been widely adopted. And that means that settlements still take days. The average cost for sending remittances remains 6%. Bitcoin's value is certainly subjective, but priced on the open market, it provides one measure of Bitcoin's financial value. Bitcoin market capitalization, the price market multiplied by its total supply, is currently over $800 billion. The collective judgment of the global market, the participants in the global market, is to find Bitcoin as worth more than the three largest metals, as the third largest metal, as nearly as valuable as silver. If compared to currencies, Bitcoin would be rated as the 15th largest, around the size of the Russian ruble. If compared to corporations, Bitcoin would be the 8th largest, just ahead of TSMC and behind Meta, Facebook. In the broadest sense, it doesn't follow that Bitcoin mining is wasted energy at the point where individuals and firms in an open market are willing to pay for it. But more specifically, however, I would argue that Bitcoin provides immense value to society. The backbone of the global financial system, SWIFT and its correspondent banking system, was developed in the 1970s, an analog solution unfit for the digital age. The Bank of International Settlements has commented on this trend, detailing how correspondent banking relationships are declining, while costs remain high in Latin America and Africa, and cross-border settlement volumes have increasingly flowed to alternatives. Now, while SWIFT had a major update several years ago, as I already alluded to, again, this has not been widely adopted. But nonetheless, it still requires banking infrastructure from the past. Here's what matters. Most people in the world lack access to a bank. And the frictions associated with cross-border payments have given rise to a number of alternative solutions. As many of you know, some of you represent. These solutions are the latest in fintech. They are private blockchains, they are CBDCs, they are other cryptocurrencies, and they are Bitcoin. Now, each of these systems has distinct features, benefits, and risks. And as of now, it's unclear which of these solutions will capture the majority of cross-border capital flows. But nonetheless, the technology that we use to replace the legacy system will have profound implications on the global economy. Ultimately, the market will decide which of these solutions is best. Today, Bitcoin has the largest market penetration and market cap of any cryptocurrency, with over 100 million users and adoption rates on par or greater than internet adoption in the mid-90s. But it isn't just a market that's choosing Bitcoin. It's the people who need the alternative financial tools the most. Today, over 1.3 billion people live in countries with double or triple digit inflation. Billions more live without basic property rights or access to the internet, where access to the internet is more common than access to a bank account. Despite its volatility, Bitcoin provides some monetary certainty. Now, it's difficult for Americans to see this monetary certainty, but let's compare it to the Venezuelan bolivar. The famed economist Hernando de Soto has written extensively about the link of economic growth and development to securing property rights, particularly focusing on countries just like these. Now, as Bitcoin guarantees property rights and provides effectively a bank account on your phone, it is likely to be a key factor in lifting these economies out of poverty and into a developed economy. Now, the overwhelming majority of the world today is forced to use a currency that is other than the dollar, the pound, the euro, the yen, and the renminbi. In short, billions live without the same currency assurances those in highly industrialized economies are accustomed to. As an example of this, it recently hit home to me a few years ago because I have family members in India that woke up one day to find their large denomination bills as effectively no longer legal currency, effectively confiscated. Now, unsurprisingly, data shows that Bitcoin adoption is disproportionately high in places that are marred with high inflation, weak respect for property rights, and poor governance, which are often the same areas underserved by SWIFT and correspondent banking. Now, while Bitcoin is far from the only solution for individuals facing these circumstances, today it is the money trusted by the world's activists, by the world's most vulnerable to financial censorship, surveillance, and repression. The Human Rights Foundation's Alex Gladstein has documented this trend over the years. His reporting demonstrates how pro-democracy activists in Belarus and Hong Kong, how the feminist coalition in Nigeria, and how the women's rights activists in Afghanistan all trust Bitcoin to enable their fight for basic civil liberties. In short, Bitcoin is worth its energy usage because it's an open source solution to current payment frictions and sets the standard for what a global, natively digital monetary network should look like. Bitcoin was the first system to achieve distributed consensus in an adversarial environment, reliably securing hundreds of billions of dollars over the last decade, with over a 99% uptime. Now, of the aforementioned solutions to the need for digital money, there is compelling evidence to assert that Bitcoin is the most proven, the most reliable, the most secure. But even if you disagree, and I know many of you work for alt currencies, and maybe you think that Bitcoin will be replaced by these, the existence of Bitcoin ensures accountability in the proliferation of alternative solutions through competition. Bitcoin works today. It has desirable qualities for the monetary network that are embedded into its code, like property rights, open access, equal representation. In a world without Bitcoin, proponents of alternative solutions would have the burden to prove that theirs is not just superior to the legacy system, but also to Bitcoin itself. And I should add, it's an active competition. Bitcoin can change, and new layers built on top of it will leave significant room for innovation, such as the Lightning Network. Now, if alternative solutions don't match up, the market will continue to move to Bitcoin. In this way, Bitcoin holds whatever blockchain solutions we develop to a high standard of openness, fairness, privacy protection, and security. All right, so in conclusion, we've already gone through how most projections on the future of Bitcoin's energy use are based upon faulty premises. We've examined how most of Bitcoin's use is more sustainable than other energy sources, and how the counterfactual, what would have been done if not for the Bitcoin transaction, is likely to have also been quite energy intensive. Energy intensive, likely using a much dirtier mix. We've examined how proof of work is central to the innovation of Bitcoin, and it has a unique value, albeit that uses energy to work. It requires energy. We've examined how a number of Bitcoin has a number of pro-environmental aspects that are still undercovered and underexplored. We've examined how banning Bitcoin mining is just not practical, and such actions will simply outsource Bitcoin mining to even dirtier geographies. And we've analyzed, or I've at least stated, that Bitcoin has a substantial value. Overall, based upon these, it's clear that the environmental concerns of Bitcoin's impact are overblown. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Bitcoin could play a much stronger role in a greener future. That said, I'm the first to acknowledge these questions are complicated ones, and they require further examination, rigorous examination, academic evaluation. This is why I helped co-found the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where we will be evaluating these issues more concretely to separate the facts from the fiction, regardless of where the facts lead us. We are not denialists who are not concerned by the environmental questions. Quite the opposite. We think this is extremely important and topical, and these are questions that we need to resolve to the extent we can. Now, if you are interested, I hope you will reach out to us and help us work on these important issues. Thank you.
But if you would like to ask some questions, Derek said he'll be available for a couple minutes. Take this off. Tomorrow, so if you need to leave, by all means, please do. We start tomorrow morning at 8:30 in the morning. Tomorrow we're going to be focusing much more on the legal. But Derek, if you've got a couple minutes, and if anybody has some questions, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. I'm sorry, due to the time, I know a lot of people had to leave, but we did record it, and it will be on our YouTube channel, and we've got a fairly large following. I also want to introduce you to Bruce Porter. Is Bruce here? I guess he's probably already left. Bruce has a following of about 2 million people, and
Would love to talk to him.
Yeah, he's doing interviews for those of us. So we will get you in touch with Bruce. Okay. And again, that was such a great presentation. We definitely want to blast that out. So on our YouTube channel, you'll find this presentation, guys. Please hit it and promote it. But I'm sure some people have some questions, and there may be even some people that disagree with you. Okay. And incidentally, Priya, could you come up to the stage for just a second? Priya leads our and I never get it right, even though I think I was the one that came up with it. Sustainable Environmental Stewardship, and she's going to be hosting our event in May. Okay. And I think I mentioned before, we'll be the.
I would love to have my team meet with you and get to know your work.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
So that event will be at the Mayflower Hotel. We have 3 floors. I think it's 7 ballrooms, 12 breakout rooms. We're going to be covering sustainable environmental resources from a variety of perspectives, healthcare, technology, everything like that. Priya is the lead in designing that program, but yeah, so it'll be great. So Priya, I don't know if you want to say, let's get some questions for you. Does anybody have any questions that they have for Derek?
Sounds like she has some questions.
Yeah. And then
I'm going to ask my questions from there for that.
Okay, that's great. But anybody who's interested in that event, please touch base with Maria.
You can ask your question on the main mic. I don't want to on the camera.
Yeah. That guy has the question before me, so I'll let him go first. You
Sure.
have a question for Derek?
And thank you guys for staying. I think this is very, very meaningful because a lot of people would disagree with you, and you presented a lot of facts. And what we really need to do is bring both sides to the
good.
table. And so, any questions? And by the way, anybody who wants to, after this, we're going to be meeting on the rooftop of the Washington Hotel for food and drinks and stuff like that. So if you'd like to just join and hang out, we'd be happy to see you there.
Okay.
You can
shout. I'll reiterate your question if you'd like.
Yeah, just go ahead and shout your question out. He'll repeat it.
So my name is Ryan Cooper. I represent Bowie State University, the Bowie State University Blockchain Association Club.
He's the president of the club.
And I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can do globally for HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, to try to reach out to them. I know about Mouse Belt University. I know about Ripple doing things with Morgan State University, but I'm just curious, is there anything that you can do to try to replicate and reinforce what we're trying to do?
Sure. So Ryan's asking about how historically black colleges can get more involved on this and other related issues. Would love to work with you, I guess is the best answer to your question. As I mentioned, the black community disproportionately is using cryptocurrencies, and the reason why is interesting, and how cryptocurrencies are more appealing to this community or solving more problems in their community is important. So I think stories from historically black colleges talking about how the existing banking system has historically failed this community, and how Bitcoin is hopefully more democratic and more open. It doesn't mean that things are perfect, but historically has been much better. I think those anecdotes and stories are great, helping unbanked populations, but would love to work with you because that is actually very important to our mission, what we're doing. Did I adequately capture your question?
Ryan, don't go anywhere. We've got a close relationship with the Minority Business Development Agency in the Department of Commerce, right? I don't know if you met J.R. Baggerty, right? So what I'd love to do is, and when you said disproportionately high or low?
Oh, disproportionately high.
Okay. Yes. So what I'd like to do, and I'm offering this as a GBA, we'll do at least a Zoom call in the near distant future, talking about this topic and minorities, right? And let's get some folks from the Minority Business Development Agency, and even possibly maybe Dr. Robert Brown. I don't know if you had a chance to hear his talk. And then we'll invite you, and let's talk about how that can be a good thing. And Ryan, why don't we work together to plan that?
Happy to help out. Thanks for the question.
Great.
Right.
Derek, great presentation. I lead Sustainable Environmental Stewardship Group, and I'm the UK President for Government Blockchain Association. I have to say that was very courageous of you to find Bitcoin Policy Institute, because as Sustainable Environmental Stewardship, I know how much wrath I get from people that how do I even talk about blockchain and sustainability in ones and tens, to the point that one person actually who was interviewing me for an opportunity refused because I was related to blockchain. So well done you. But I think my question is, why Bitcoin Policy Institute? And was it because Bitcoin was receiving more wrath than the other cryptocurrencies? Why not Cryptocurrency Policy Institute? And is it just proof of work? You're a fan of proof of work? Just the story behind that, I think.
Sure, great question, and would love to work with you. I do have some clarifications in some of my remarks, so I hope nothing came across incorrect, but I can correct after the record if there are some errors. We came together on this issue because we believe that Bitcoin faced unique policy challenges. It is obviously the vast majority of currency, of cryptocurrency, but yet it faces unique policy challenges specifically related to proof of work, but not exclusively. There are other ones that are relatively unique, and we felt like it wasn't getting particular representation on that issue. There are definitely organizations, and we work with a lot of them, that are doing fantastic work in this town. Some of them are in this room or hopefully watching in the live stream. But we felt like when the conversation was all broader cryptocurrency, proof of work often wasn't adequately represented. And an example of this is the January 20th energy hearing, where the hearing was on the energy use of Bitcoin mining. And there were essentially no representatives of the Bitcoin mining community at that hearing. Now, luckily, we had some fans, some advocates on our side. It wasn't like we had zero representation, but we didn't feel like there was adequate representation on these issues. We also felt like these questions haven't been adequately explored. It's not like there's a simple answer. A lot of my slides, it's not simple, and I'm not trying to say that it is simple. And so we felt like there's a lot of work to do, and there are unique challenges, and that we can be allies with the other organizations and other currencies.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And I have to say that you absolutely have to join us for the May event,
Okay.
Sustainable Economic Growth. For those who don't know, GBA is hosting another event in May from 25th to 27th, Sustainable Economic Growth, and the title is Let 1,000 Flowers Bloom. And the idea is that how can blockchain help sustainable and resilient turn into a sustainable and resilient economy, how blockchain can help with science, technology, and resilient ecosystem, basically. And we'll be covering all of those topics and much more, and Derek's presence would be really, really appreciated. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Derek.
And bring a flak jacket. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? Guys, did you guys learn anything today? Was today a good day? Oracle. Yeah, Oracle. You know what I learned today is that Bitcoin didn't come into being to replace the fiat system. It came to compete with it. That was my big takeaway from today. Ralph, was that your comment?
No, it's a good one, so I'll take credit for it.
Okay.
But, Gerard, if I can just have one tiny little point, it would be more respectful to call the incumbent system a fiduciary system rather than a fiat system.
Yeah.
Because the people who are in charge of monetary policy are, in fact, see themselves as fiduciaries and are very conscientious. Fiat was coined to sound arbitrary and to sound artificial.
Yeah.
Sounds monarchical.
I just want to repeat your point because it was really, he said that rather than call it a fiat system, we should call it a fiduciary system because the folks that manage it see themselves as fiduciaries, meaning taking responsibility for it. And I think that that's a much more respectful term. With regard to that, we welcome a diversity of opinions. We believe that people ought to come and disagree respectfully, make their cases, and hopefully we learn from it. Unfortunately, I believe the world right now has too much of this. We can't disagree with each other, or we're offended, or we're canceled, or whatever, right? I like kind of offending people, right? But I like to do it respectfully. So.
Gerard, if you can get Fiat Motors to sponsor you,
Fiat Motors, I like that.
then stick with Fiat. Until that date and time, stop giving them all that free publicity.
No more free publicity to Fiat Motors. All right, Derek, thank you so much. We'll see if you guys want to. We'll be at the rooftop of the Washington Hotel.
Anyone else have any questions? I wanted to make sure I answered the questions.
I think we're good. Your presentation was very thorough.
I did have two quick corrections. I don't like to say something wrong. So sustainable and renewable are commonly not synonyms. I use them perhaps as synonyms. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Usually sustainable includes nuclear. And so generally I meant sustainable including nuclear. That's my position. I also wanted to, I think that was the main correction I noticed in recollection, but if I made any other errors, this is a work in progress. We got other experts working on our team, so please message me and I'll correct the record online if possible, because I want things to be rigorous, and that's our goal.
How about putting you onto your website? Because you're not there, you know that. Okay, you've got your fellows, but you don't have you. So is that due to modesty, or are you keeping a low profile?
Due to modesty.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. If you want to do any kind of follow-up, right, what I would say is, what would I say? Time, we got to go. All right. Thank you, Jordan. Jordan keeps me straight every time I mess up. He's the one that gets me back on track. So, and Evan, thank you very much.
Tweet at me, I respond to it.
Okay, what's your tweet? What's your address?
At Derek Khanna, DEREK, KHANNA.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, guys. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 8:30.